So, where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
Uh, Kind of grew up all over the place. My father was military, so we moved around every few years. Uh, it was pretty much, well, it was normal for me. It might not be for other people, but we moved around, didn't know the same people all my life. Although sometimes on occasion you go to another posting and you see somebody that you were posted with in another place. So yeah, over the years you might meet the odd person that you knew before. Um, I think life was sort of normal. My dad was military police, and he was also a Korean War veteran. He had PTSD, though I don't think he ever knew it or would admit to it. Um,
How did you see that manifest?
Rages, inability to handle stress. As a police officer, he was fairly high up, um, considered to be like the chief in a number of places. But as when I was a toddler, he investigated suicides, military suicides, and stuff. And so he dealt with a lot of traumatic things there. And he was also hospitalized during Korea for a couple of weeks for what they called at that time shell shock.
Right, that whole term.
Um, yeah, so we kind of lived on the sharp edge of his emotions, um, a good part of our life.
So, sort of having to always be on alert or be wary.
Be wary, be quiet. I mean, there were four of us kids and my parents, so family of six, and you couldn't come up with a quieter family, um, because we were pretty well behaved.
Is that,
Yes,
do you hear the siren too?
yes,
Okay.
yes, you hear it. Yes, yes. It's actually a trigger for me. Um,
Oh, they went right by your place.
it does. I live on one of the main avenues to get into the city, and ambulances go by night and day. And well, I've had PTSD since I was 16, and um, ambulances used to take my legs right out from underneath me when I was a kid, like 18. Um, and I've gotten a lot better, but in the last 5 years, it's been a little worse because of what happened with the medical errors. So.
Right. Okay. So after childhood spent moving around quite a bit and having to make new friends and new schools every time you moved, uh, then what happened in your life?
When we went to Ottawa when I was 15, and we had come to Nova Scotia first. And my dad had bought a house in Nova Scotia, planning to retire, but he was still in the military, and he got posted to Cyprus and then to Ottawa. And when he went back to Ottawa after doing a tour of Cyprus, he said, "I'm not going alone this time," so we all went back with him and spent about a year there before returning to Nova Scotia when he retired. And I went to university at 20, in New Brunswick. New Brunswick is where I was born, but I kind of consider Nova Scotia my home. And when I was in university, my mom got sick. My second year of university, she got cancer, bowel cancer. Both my parents died of bowel cancer. So there was her fighting that. It was she was sick for 4 years, had 4 surgeries, 2 different kinds of chemotherapy, lost her hair twice. It's a very trying time, but I graduated from university and came home to work. I was going to go back to university, but she asked me not to because she kind of needed me because she was ill. So I took the first job I could get, which was a reporter for a small town newspaper. Then kind of went from there. Worked that job for 3 years and then became a photo tech after that. But I kept an association up with the newspapers, so that I always covered things over a 15-year period with them while I went on to other things. Went back to school a couple of times. The last time was in 2011, 2012. I went to community college to take information technology, because I'd been working as a caregiver for intellectually challenged adults for about 10 years, and I had a really bad back and not much chance of going any higher in the company, the organization that I was in. I lived and worked with intellectually challenged adults. And then I decided to go back to school again in 2011 and 2012 and finished the first year and then ran out of money. So I had to go back to work again and was thinking that I'd work a couple of years and then go back to school again after that, at least part-time, to finish that out. Trying to improve my life, and I got sick.
So this is in 2012?
2014, I was working as a caregiver for a man who had MS, who was bedridden with MS. And I had only worked with him for 3 months. And I had worked a couple of other jobs in there. A couple of them were part-time. One of them was night, and they were at the same time. And when I got this job, I was behind on bills, and I was trying to catch up. So I wasn't eating, or not much, or just kind of when I could afford it, which was payday. And then I was trying to get my bills straightened out. So I went about 3 months kind of starving, eating when I could, when I had the money, but mostly putting money towards bills. And towards the end of August 2014, just when I was catching up, my bowels stopped functioning. And a few days later, it started to hurt really badly.
So
And
that meant you stopped having bowel movements?
yeah.
Okay.
It was really quiet, like nothing was moving.
And so this was just out of the blue, no signs of?
No past history of any kind of gastrointestinal problem of any kind. And I was just a little bit older than my mom was when she was diagnosed with bowel cancer. And having both parents diagnosed with bowel cancer and dying from it, I went to the ER because the pain was really bad. And generally, I'm pretty healthy. I mean, I have a few things like blood pressure problems since I was 20, and some mental health issues and arthritis and ordinary things like that, but I've never been sick. And so I was quite nervous that something was happening, like cancer or something, because I figured that I had a blockage or something. So I went to the ER instead of going to my doctor, because my doctor's in another town and my car had broken down a few weeks before. So I was without a vehicle, and I went to the ER and told them that I had a tremendous amount of pain, and it was in different areas, but mostly in the lower left part of my abdomen, but in a few places, and that I'd never experienced anything like this, and that I didn't think my bowel was working. It was a young resident. ERs are overcrowded, and not enough people there, but he listened and said I had good bowel sounds, and told me to go home and eat something. I was only constipated, and that he said eat something, preferably high fiber, and it'll work its way out. And I was relieved. I remember sighing and was quite relieved, because everybody wants to hear that they're going to be okay. But I didn't really believe him, because I've never had pain like this before in my life. He didn't do any tests, no blood tests or x-rays or anything like that, and just sent me home and told me that the ER was for emergencies.
So kind of shamed you.
Yeah, I felt very ashamed, like I was abusing the system. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and I had worked 64 hours that week as a caregiver. And I still had, well, I was scheduled for 64 hours that week. I worked 2 more shifts after that. Anyway, as I was leaving, they let me go. And as I was leaving, a nurse came in and asked for a urine sample. I was supposed to cover their behinds or whatever, but they never did any blood tests. They never did any white blood cell count. No x-ray. And I went home, and I had to work at, I think it was 8 or 8:30 in the morning. And I did so in a lot of pain, but I'd been in pain for a few days, and it was getting worse. And I tried to listen to him. So I went out. I had to go up to the drugstore to get medication for my client. And I stopped at a fast food place and got a small salad. I didn't have much appetite. I hadn't eaten in days or had much to drink in days. And I ate about a quarter of it and went home or whatever. Anyway, about 3:35 in the morning, Wednesday, September 10th, I woke up and the pain was incredible. And I was vomiting, projectile vomiting, and trying to run up the stairs. But I looked at my watch to see what time it was. And I knew something had gotten a whole lot worse. But I also knew that I had to work that morning. And I had a 15-hour shift. So I had to go to work anyway. And I spent much of the day lying on my client's bathroom floor, vomiting, while trying to look after him and trying to get him in Hoyer lifts and get him up and take care of him. It was just incredible agony. I could barely walk. And like I said, I was laying on the floor when I wasn't looking after my client. And actually, when I was trying to get him up, I had to leave him in the Hoyer lift and run in to vomit.
Wow. So you're providing healthcare, and you're the one who's needing some healthcare at that point.
Yes. It's one of my brags. Is the last day I ever worked. I worked with a ruptured bowel. Anyway, I went home after 11 o'clock, which was the time I got home. I fortunately didn't walk. I bought a bus pass after being sent home from the hospital. The 2 nights before, and I spent the next couple of days on the couch and thinking about going back to the hospital, but I was kind of ashamed. My car was broken. I did have the bus pass, but I didn't think that I could walk down the hill. So anyway, I wound up laying on the couch being sick, and unable to move, unable to eat until Friday, September 13th, when my roommate came home. I told her that I was really ill, and rather than being down in my room, which was in the basement, I spent time on the couch because the bathroom was up there and I was pretty ill. And I said, look, tomorrow, could you perhaps take me back to the ER? Because this is really bad. I thought that Wednesday night when I got off work that I was going to die. I went out and passed out on the back porch in the rain for about an hour or so. Sorry. Anyway, she said no problem. She said my skin was turning gray. And I went back to the hospital Saturday evening, September 13th, and told them what had happened, that I'd been sent home and I had terrible pains in my lower abdomen, especially in projectile vomiting constantly. And so they took me in and did some blood tests and an x-ray. And after that, they took me back to a room, and I told the nurse that I was going to go out to the main waiting room because I couldn't sit up. I had to lay down. A few hours later, we went to check on what was going on, and I guess he was an attending physician. Said, oh, we've been looking for you. We got your blood test back. And he said, you have diverticulitis.
And what is diverticulitis?
Diverticulitis is like pockets in the bowel. And apparently food or seeds, whatever, can get caught in there and cause infection, which needs to be treated with antibiotics because worst case scenario, it can rupture. You can have ruptured bowels, get peritonitis, sepsis, you can die. So they knew this from the white blood cell count. They didn't tell me what it was at the time, but at the time, I know from medical records it was 28.02 and normal is 9. He said the x-ray didn't show anything, there wasn't any, but nobody mentioned anything about surgery or anything. He just said it was after 11 o'clock at night, and a nurse, or maybe she was another resident, came and gave me this drink, which was gastrographin. We need you to come back here in the morning, take another one of these drinks. They made me take a drink then and take another drink in the morning, and to come back at 10 o'clock for a CAT scan.
And this drink was in preparation for the CAT scan?
Yes, it's for dye, so that they can see your insides better during the CAT scan. So anyway, I came back in the morning, walked in on my own power, and had the CAT scan and the x-ray, and waited a little while for them to come out. And a resident came out and got me and took me to a small office, kind of separate, I think, from the ER. He said that I'm looking at your CAT scan. He said, you've got 4 holes in your intestine. He said there could be more, but he said I'm looking at it, and 4 is how many I can count. And he was a nice young guy, and very positive and intelligent. And he said there's, one of 2 ways we can deal with this. Either, you have abscesses, you have intra-abdominal abscesses. And he said the first way we can deal with it is to drain the abscesses and allow the bowel to heal on its own. And he said the second is surgery. And he didn't explain what, but I said, I'll go with the first option. And he says, I thought you would, but he said, I need to go upstairs and check with the boss.
So they originally said the diverticulitis, and now they're saying that you've got 4 holes in your colon at least.
Yes.
And also, what's the other term you use?
Abscesses. outside the colon from the infection spilling outside. They didn't say the word peritonitis, but I kind of imagined that I had peritonitis.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that term either.
It's just
Inflammation of the
the
peritoneal.
content, yeah, the contents of my bowels were leaking into my peritoneum, and they didn't say that, but I figured I did because I knew that I had walked around for 4 days with a ruptured bowel. He was fairly impressed that I walked in on my own because with a ruptured bowel, I shouldn't be able to walk at all. So he went upstairs and I waited down there and really thought about leaving because I was really scared. You know, hospitals are scary, ruptured bowels are scary. And I had known a woman, a handicapped person who died before I ever took my position. But I knew her sisters. I worked in the same house that she had lived in, but she had died before I got there, who had died of a peritonitis induced heart attack within 12 hours of her bowel rupturing during a colonoscopy. So that's why I figured I had peritonitis, because that was, yeah, that's what she died of, was peritonitis induced heart attack. Anyways, I was going to leave because everything was telling me to get out, but I didn't figure I'd get very far because I could barely walk. I stayed. I stayed to listen to what he had to say. Anyway, he came back down probably 20 minutes later and said, "You're going to need surgery." Didn't say anything about what. And the only thing we had talked about was draining the abscesses. And I need you to sign this form. Nothing else, no explanation of any kind, what they were going to do. And I didn't think to ask because I just assumed that they were going to drain the abscesses and let my bowel heal.
How would they drain the abscesses?
They could do it with needles or they can do it laparoscopically, which is a less invasive
Mm-hmm.
procedure.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at that time, I wasn't really aware that they did any other surgery other than laparoscopically anymore. That's how naive I was, because I have 3 siblings and a niece who had their gallbladders removed laparoscopically. And years ago, it used to be, they'd split you wide open and make a big mess of your. But now it's done with kind of microscopically, I guess, but with a scope and minor, a lot less intrusive.
So
Anyway,
you thought you were signing a release form for the
the
draining
treatment,
of the
treatment,
abscesses.
yes, yeah. And I could barely see, partly because of pain, and partly because I had contact lenses in, and I had been crying, and they were kind of scummy. So my eyes were really blurry, so I could barely see the line to sign it, and I could not see to read it. And the young man sat over on the opposite side of the room and didn't say anything to me. And I signed it, thinking that they were just going to drain these abscesses and that everything was going to be okay. I might have to stay a day or two and heal up, but I had, where I had thought I was dying since Wednesday night, I kind of had the feeling that things were not as dire as I thought. So anyway, he took me into another room, into like a nursing unit, and handed me over to a nurse, very nice lady, who looked after me and got me ready for this, what I thought was going to be a scope. And no one said anything to me. They asked me tons of questions, and some of them I didn't understand why, like what kind of stressors do you have in your life, and what kind of supports do you have at home, emotional supports. And um, first thing they asked me was I wearing, did I wear contacts or anything? I said, yes, I'm wearing contacts now, which they wrote down. Anyway, very nice lady, and I waited there. They hooked me up to an IV and gave me some painkiller and stuff. And the wait was about 5 to 6 hours. I had gone in there at noontime, and around 5:30 or so, they came in and got me and took me to a room, like a patient room, with another bed in there and another patient. And my nephew came in and his girlfriend. And I had spent some time on the telephone trying to get to my family. I had left my cell phone home and couldn't remember a lot of numbers without my cell phone. Always carry emergency numbers with you. But I did get a hold of my brother eventually, and he got a hold of my nephew who had just come up to the city to go to school. And he met me in the room with his girlfriend. And right after that, they came and got me and took me down to the OR. Outside the OR, people were kind of coming at me and asking me questions, like if I had any kind of problem with receiving blood products. And I said, no. It kind of made me pause for a few minutes. And I said, no, but I understand that blood products may be part of something if something bleeds. And they asked me if I had any allergies, and I had, they'd said my name and said, were you a patient here in July of 2013 for anaphylaxis? And I said, yes. And you're allergic to quinapril. And I said, what's quinapril? And they said, well, I said, is it the same thing as Acupril, which is a blood pressure drug? And I said, no, I'm not. So I figured that they'd correct that. And then there was an anesthesiologist who came out and talked to me. And mostly that was to see how far back I could put my head. I knew I was going out. But mostly it was to see how far I could open my mouth and how far back I could put my neck so that they wouldn't have any problem intubating me. But nobody, not the nurse when I was in the unit for 5 hours or anything else, ever asked me if I understood what procedure I was having or said anything about the procedure. So I got wheeled into the room, and this man came in, and he was introduced to me as being the surgeon. And he said he'll be the one doing the procedure. And he came over, shook my hand, very nice man, beautiful smile. And I felt calm. I felt that I was in good hands, that I was safe. The next thing I remember is I woke up feeling like I was cut in two, screaming, and I couldn't catch my breath. And I tried to sit up. I couldn't see anything, but there were people that I heard a voice over top of my head. I think it was the anesthesiologist. And he called my name, Elizabeth, Elizabeth. No, 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 Elizabeth, Elizabeth. And then there were people at my sides that grabbed my shoulders and held me down and laid right on top of me, put their whole bodies right on top of me. And I don't know whether I passed out or whether they gave me something to make me go unconscious again. But I felt like I'd been cut in half horizontally, and I remember thinking it was like something out of a Stephen King novel, where something with huge claws comes out of the mist and just cuts your body completely in two. And then the next thing I remember, I was being wheeled down a hallway. I still couldn't see. It was kind of dark. And I was screaming and crying and begging to die. Oh my God, somebody please kill me. Oh my God, please kill me. Please let me die. And the person wasn't talking to me, but we got to a room. The lights sort of seemed a little clearer, and I heard him speak to whoever was there. It was a nurse, and but I couldn't tell what he said, and I was just screaming, "Please kill me, please let me die."
Just so much pain.
The most incredible pain that I've ever felt, worse than a ruptured valve. And I knew that something had gone horribly wrong. Anyway, they wheeled me in the room, and the nurse took over. I was diaphoretic, sweating really badly from the pain. She brought me. She said, "Would you like a cold cloth or a wet cloth?" And I said, "Yes, please." And she told me that I'd lost my sigmoid colon and that I now had an ostomy. And I wanted to die even more.
For folks who don't know, what is an ostomy?
An ostomy is where part of your intestine is put out through a hole in your abdomen, so that waste material, stool, can empty into a bag. Anyway, she left me alone for a few minutes. It was in a ward, but there was nobody else there. But she came back to do vitals, and I was hooked up. I still had an art line in my chest, which is, I guess, like a central line where they can put drugs and things that was they put in me before they put me out for the procedure. But they had me hooked up to a bunch of equipment so that they could read my heart rate and IVs and stuff. Anyway, she came back a few minutes later and asked me how I was and was I still feeling suicidal. She told me that it was probably a reaction from the anesthetic. I didn't think so, but when she asked me if I was doing better, I said, yeah, I was doing okay. I tried to calm myself down, but it wasn't. I still just wanted to die and was having really bizarre thoughts and violent thoughts, and I got rid of those right away.
And so,
Um,
before you're wanting them to kill you because you're just in so much pain, and now you're wanting to die. How come?
I'm still in excruciating pain that apparently I was in another room, like a recovery room before that, before I got wheeled in, but I don't remember anything from there. But according to the hospital notes, the pain was not being controlled at all by medication. They were giving me, I think it was Dilaudid, and they were giving it often, and the pain was going uncontrolled. It was not having any effect. She asked me if I was still feeling suicidal, and I said no, but I was just trying to keep myself calm. And she says, you were pretty emotionally overwrought when you were brought in here. And she asked me if I wanted to see somebody, like psychiatrist, somebody from mental health or whatever. And I said, yeah, I think that would be a good idea. And apparently I spent the night there. I had no idea what time it was or anything because I couldn't see any clock. I couldn't see anything. My eyes were worse than ever. I still had contact lenses in. No one had asked me to take them out, and I had them in for somewhere around a week, and didn't know it because I was so out of it, so much in shock, like traumatized. Anyway, I guess I spent the night there because I went septic. Apparently, they say I was septic before the surgery. the surgeon in one of his reports said that I was white blood cell count was 25, which was severely septic, but it was actually 28 the night before, and it had gone down to 24.52. So whether it was the IV antibiotics or whether my body tried to fight it, like I was only on IV antibiotics for an hour before they took the second blood test, and my white blood cell count had dropped almost 4 points, and my immature grands and other things that were out of whack were remedying, getting better. So I don't know if I was responding to treatment, if they needed to do what they needed to do. And I found out from the notes too that the CAT scan, the notes from the CAT scan, I don't know if anybody ever read them, but it said nothing about a ruptured bowel. But the forensic report said that I had one hole in my bowel, and I've read that that could have been repaired with a colonoscopy. I don't know, I'm not a doctor, that they could have blocked the hole with heat. But I lost 10 inches of bowel anyway, and had an ostomy. Anyway, I was taken up to another floor eventually. I guess it would be the next morning. But I went severely septic within a few hours of surgery. My white blood cell count went critical. So they had to give me all kinds of extra antibiotics and stuff. It went up to 36 point something or whatever, which was marked as critical. But eventually they got it down and took me up in the morning to a room. They had a room for me and had all these bags on the IV pole. There were multiple bags, like 4 or 5 bags. And my whole body was puffed up like the Goodyear blimp. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't bend my knees. And I thought that was the fluid, because that's part of the treatment for sepsis, is to keep the person full of fluids so that their organs don't shut down, and so that I guess you can lose your limbs can start to die, and in some cases be amputated for gangrene. But I didn't know any of this because I didn't even know I was septic. Nobody told me. And eventually, I think it was then that this couple of young residents came in and said, well, surgery went well. And I said, I don't believe in surgery. And he laughed at me and said, well, is that a religious thing or what? And I kind of said, I don't know. I wasn't super talkative. I just wanted to die. And he said, so what do you think of it now? So apparently they didn't know that I had surgery that I wasn't told about. And the girl pipes up and she's laughing and she says, oh yeah, don't tell Mike that. He just loves surgery. And I don't know if they were there to tell me what they did, but it never happened. And they just left. So I never did really find out until I got my medical records 4 months later what happened to me, that my intestines were all glued together into the wall of my peritoneum, and had to be cut off and in some cases burned off.
And why were your bowels attached to your perineum like that?
Apparently it can happen even if you have a ruptured bowel. The contents of your bowels going into your causing infection. Your bowels apparently can even if they get to you right away, can glue together and have to be prized apart. Glue to the abdominal walls, to other organs. The small intestines, the loops were all glued together and they had to be taken out and prized apart. And the splenic colon where my spleen was, or was supposed to be, I don't have a spleen. I had surgery against my will when I was 16 after a car accident to remove my spleen, which is the start of my PTSD. They had to use a cautery tool to disconnect my bowel from where it was glued to the inside of where my spleen should be but wasn't. And my intestines were glued to my liver and were coming down on my bladder, which was partially collapsed. So yeah, apparently it was bad, and they had to do a lot of work, and they took out my sigmoid colon and gave me an ostomy.
How long were you in the hospital before you got home?
At that time, I was in until the 25th of September. So 11 days. I had problems with infection. I was on constant antibiotics before they stepped me down to pills from IV antibiotics. And I spiked a number of fevers because of the infection. But they were going to send me home. It was the 25th of September. And I saw the surgeon for the first time since in the operating room. He said, "We're thinking of sending you home tomorrow." And I was happy. And he was smiling the whole while. And the young resident, he was the chief surgical resident, is the man who was supposed to do informed consent. They were smiling, so I smiled too. I was glad to go home. I did not feel good. I was still in horrible pain, but I was glad to go home. And the next morning they let me go home, and it was a different resident who came in, and he said, "We're kind of iffy about sending you home because you still have a bit of infection." He says, your white blood cell count is at 11 and normal is 9. But we're thinking we're going to send you home. You're going to have some antibiotics for a few weeks, 2 different kinds. So they did send me home with these antibiotics and a bottle of morphine. I had asked to change. I had been taking Dilaudid, and I had asked to change after a few days to morphine because Dilaudid wasn't handling the pain. So anyways, I spent 4 days home in horrible pain, and was afraid that the antibiotics weren't working, or I was reacting to them or whatever, because I was getting sicker and sicker. And I took almost all the morphine within the first couple of days. Anyway, I had to move in there. I moved to another apartment on the 29th of September because my roommate was giving up the apartment that we lived in. So I had friends come and pack for me while I was in the hospital, and hired a moving company, and we moved on the 29th of September. I didn't lift anything. I couldn't do anything. The moving company did everything, and I still couldn't eat and was still feeling really badly. So I called the was it 311 or is it 211? 211, I think it is you get a hold of an RN. And I told them what had happened to me, and that I wasn't doing very well, and that I was vomiting, and she said she was going to send our conversation ahead, but I should go back to the ER. And the young resident had told me to go back to the ER if I had anything out of the unusual. So I went back, and I was readmitted on September 30th with a small bowel obstruction, and abscesses had grown. Multiple infections, severe diffuse colitis, a few other things. Anyway, they kept me in for another 2 weeks and put me back on IV antibiotics and painkiller, and I couldn't eat for days again.
How come your health went backward?
Because when they stepped me down from the IV antibiotics to antibiotics by mouth, they didn't work. So when I went back in the hospital, they changed one of the antibiotics and put me back on IV antibiotics, which worked a lot better. Put me back on painkiller, no, it was Dilaudid, to try and control the pain, which was pretty bad at that point too. So I was in there for almost 2 weeks. Got out Thanksgiving Sunday and went home again. This time the infection was under control.
So how were you feeling mentally, emotionally during those 2 weeks? Because you were feeling really rough coming out of the surgery.
I stayed pretty rough. Back for the first 2 to 3 months, I was just in shock. I could carry on a conversation, but I couldn't think right. I was kind of dissociative. Um, couldn't believe this was happening to me. Couldn't believe that I didn't see some kind of psychiatric help while I was in there, because I said repeatedly to people that I was suicidal. The different people wrote in the notes that I was suicidal, that it had a devastating effect on me. But when I tried to tell people that I'd had surgery that I hadn't been told about, they didn't listen. They kind of missed it.
And so your thoughts of suicide were a result of the surgery, because it didn't sound like they were pre-existing before the surgery.
No, they weren't. They weren't. I wasn't suffering from depression or anything. Um, so it was just as a result of the surgery, the pain, the shock, this sense of violation. I felt just like I'd been raped. And I stayed that way. Well, I still have some of that in me now, but in the last year, about it's not as quite as in my face as it was. Like from the moment I'd wake up for 4 years, just I want to die, I want to die. I'd wake up kind of screaming in my head. Sometimes I think I woke up screaming out loud. And the repetition, the constant reliving of what happened to me, it was the only thing going through my head. I just wanted to die. And I'd be out walking in the street or whatever, and a big truck or something would go by, and I'd get the urge to want to throw myself under the wheels. But I also kind of didn't know what I was doing by times. It just wasn't here. I was just constantly reliving what happened to me.
So it sounds like when you expressed that you wanted to be, would you somebody please kill me when you're coming out of surgery because you were just in so much pain, you wanted to die at
Yeah.
that point. And
Yeah.
then when they told you what they actually did in the surgery, then you were also feeling suicidal because you felt violated
Yes.
and just not expecting all that. And
Yeah.
so as you're describing it now, it's 2 weeks after the hospital, you're at home still recovering, but now you're wanting to commit suicide because of the PTSD is just so overwhelming.
Yes. Yes. It was extremely overwhelming, but I was also numb. I looked normal. I guess I sort of acted normal, except I didn't laugh or anything. But I was like I was completely unfocused, like walking in a dream.
What was your follow-up care like from the hospital, from your GP?
I didn't see my own doctor until December, 3 months later, because again, she's in a different town. My car had died about 7 weeks before this happened to me, and I hadn't figured out the buses yet, and they were pretty dramatic to try and get used to going on the bus. So I saw her in December. She goes, "Oh my God, what happened?" Right? She knew I brought the little paper with me from the hospital to tell her in case she didn't know. Burst into her office crying. and saying, look at what they did to me, and pulling up my top. And I said, I just want to die. So she put me on antidepressants right away to try and keep me alive until we could get it reversed. And I'm not a huge believer in surgery. I'm tomophobic is the word that I've heard used for it. But it's a fear of invasive events. And I've been that way since I was a kid because I had surgery as a 16-year-old, a splenectomy after a car accident, and I had tried to escape the hospital then. My parents, my father signed a consent form, and I spent years afterwards being really messed up and fighting with my parents and everything over it. But it's really terrified of hospitals and anything medical. I had gotten better. I've had PTSD over time, over periods of time, from a few different events. I was asymptomatic and had been for since about 2009, 2010 when this last one happened to me. I don't know if I don't think I was ever cured of it, but I was definitely, there comes a point when you can usually a few years. The first time it was 10 years, last time it was 17 years, when you can sort of come out of it enough to be able to function to some extent. I mean, sometimes you can work, sometimes you can't. I've been a few years when I couldn't work, couldn't go out in public. Social phobia, wouldn't allow anybody close to me. Yeah, it came roaring back when this happened to me.
Other than the passage of time, what other things helped you in those two previous instances?
Therapy, the first time I did not have any therapy. They just was in the late 70s. Post-traumatic stress disorder didn't make it to the DSM-4 until 1980. So they didn't really know a whole lot. I went to university and took psychology and English. The first few years, I thought my problems, the rage and things like that, were because of I had a bad concussion, and I had read in a book that these are symptoms of having head trauma. And it wasn't until I got to university and after that I started reading about war veterans, Vietnam War veterans. Vietnam War hadn't been over that many years, and you were reading a lot about things like flashbacks and people not able to function and violence. And I said, gee, that sounds like me. Reading about things like shell shock, but they're all PTSD. So I didn't really have any help other than passage of time, until the second bout about 25 years ago of PTSD when I had help. Therapy helped some. Venting always helped a lot. Talking about it, writing about it. I've kept diaries on and off since I was 13. Being able to take control back. With this last time, I'm a little better because of talking about it and actually putting in a complaint about what happened to me to the Nova Scotia College of Physicians and Surgeons. Not that I can't really talk about that by law, what happened there, but it wasn't a real positive experience because they didn't believe me.
And so has that been, and I use quotations here, has that been settled or is that still an ongoing
No,
concern?
that's been settled. They just dismissed it without really examining it. And what I really wanted was not for somebody to get in trouble. I just wanted to know what happened to me and why it happened to me. And I wrote them letters, and we went back and forth between the surgeon and I, trying to correct information. I didn't find he was very honest. In fact, when they photocopied the notes, the records of the hospital, and which I already had a copy of most of them, but they also sent me a copy of the last appointment that I had seen him, which was March 24th, 2015. He wrote in this report, that he was really surprised that I was upset that I claimed to have surgery that I was never told about or properly consented for. And then he kind of descended into an ad hominem attack on my character and mental illness, blaming things on mental illness, that I wanted to die, that I asked about euthanasia. I mean, he made me sound ridiculous in the letter, like I had, like a crazy person, and taken a lot of things that I'd asked about out of context, and wrote in this letter that I was further diagnosed a month before with a sexually transmitted disease and dyspareunia. I knew right away, it shocked me when I saw this paper, almost as much as waking up with an ostomy did, because, well, I knew it wasn't true, that there was no way that I could have any kind of sexually transmitted infection, but that I also had blood tests during the time that I went to the hospital, and they proved I had no kind of infection at all, because they tested me for abscesses and stuff, and there was no infection at all. But also the fact that I'm a single, never married female who hasn't even been out on a date in over 10 years. I knew that was impossible, and that was him trying to, I guess, discredit anything I might say about having had surgery without consent. And from the point of view of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, I had asked them when I saw this letter if they could get the notes from the hospital from this particular appointment. It wasn't an appointment, I just went to the ER, and they didn't. So I sent the information back to the College of Physicians after they dismissed my case, to ask them how to get it corrected, because he had basically lied in an attempt to discredit me. Part of institutional betrayal, I guess. When a patient tries to tell you you made a mistake and you're crazy, blame the patient basically for their own problems. And in a letter written to my GP, who was a female, and she had actually read me part of the letter 6 months before about that he had checked with the chief surgical resident, to see that the papers were signed, but there was nothing in there, no notes or anything that he had given me any kind of informed consent. He didn't. He just walked away from me, told me to sign this paper, and walked away from me, and I was never told anything. So they didn't really have informed consent. Actually involves informing somebody, and I never was. My own doctor, after I went to see her in December, she made excuses for why this happened at first, that my bowel was ruptured, it had taken on a life of its own, they didn't have time to tell me. But I was on hold in this room for 5 hours, that someone could have told me anything, even hinted that I was going to have an actual surgery and not abscesses drained. And I talked to somebody from patient relations the same day as the last time I'd seen the surgeon, and I said there were no checks in place. Nobody ever asked me if I knew what procedure I was going to have. No one talked to me about it. They asked their questions that they needed for their charts or to fill in the blanks or whatever, but there was nothing to inform me. So I didn't have a clue, and I didn't understand even why they were asking some of the questions they asked, like, what kind of stressors I had at home, or when was my last relationship, or, why wouldn't somebody say, hey, do you believe in surgery? Do you, Do you know you're having surgery? Do you know what's happening to you? Because I didn't. I think that these were good people, but I think maybe things might be a bit too routine. Surgery for them is an everyday event. It's too easy to forget something when you don't have maybe a checklist of things. Maybe everybody assumed that the young chief surgical resident had told me, talked to me about it. But that's why you need the repetition of having different people come at you, different key personnel come at you and say, do you know what's happening to you? Do you know what procedure you're having? Don't let somebody go in there thinking that they're only going to have abscesses drained and wake up missing their bowel and with an ostomy. That's the most horrible, cruel, and inhumane thing that anybody's ever done to me. And I'm at conflict with myself because on the one hand I'm grateful because they tried hard to help me. They were doing their jobs, but on the other hand, I didn't want to go through that. I still don't want to live with it. I had a right to know. I had a right to say no. I had a right to ask for alternate treatment, which was what I thought the having abscesses drained and allowing my bowel to heal on its own was. I don't know if you'd ever call that a never event, what happened to me, but it's pretty close, just in my opinion.
In the patient safety world, what is a never event? That's a common term in patient safety.
A never event is like performing surgery on the wrong person, on the wrong body part, the wrong surgery, which is kind of what happened to me having a surgery that I was not informed of. It's the wrong surgery.
Should never have
Um,
happened.
it should never have happened. Like I said, it's an incredible shock. Very, very damaging, just as damaging mentally as physically, if not more. It destroys your trust in anybody.
How much do you think how the hospital and the College of Physicians, which regulates the physicians, how much has their response contributed to the PTSD you now experience?
I made it worse. Um, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, just having someone listen to me, like it was only by letters because I never actually met with them. But having the surgeon listen to me and what happened to me as a result of the mistakes actually made me better. I liken it a little bit to restorative justice, which is used in the courts quite often, where victims and perpetrators of crimes often meet, and the victims of the crime get to discuss with the perpetrators what effect this had on them. And restorative justice does work, at least in the court system, and I would say that this is sort of my version. That's what I'm calling it, is restorative justice. To not be listened to by the College of Physicians, to have them believe his lies, it hurts. It definitely makes the PTSD worse. It makes your sense of self-worth worse. But I also understand that he's a surgeon, he's a doctor, they need them. I didn't want anything to be done to him, just accept responsibility. I'm not looking to sue anybody. I've got a brother who's a lawyer, and he said suing somebody would be the last thing I'd want to do. Plus, only 2% of people who actually sue for malpractice win, so it's not worth it. I just want people to learn from it and to stop it from happening to someone else if possible. But like I said, it did help me be less suicidal or less in your face suicidal. I was able to wake up, like it's on my mind all the time. It's intrusive, but it's not quite as painful as it was. It's not, I'm not thinking I want to die every second of the day. In fact, I've been able to distract myself and do other things that actually help me when I am struggling.
And what are those things that help you when you're struggling? Because I know other folks will also be struggling
Yeah.
and trying to figure
Well,
out how
I'm
to.
I'm writing a book. I've been writing it for about a year. It's actually it's a cookbook, but it's a mental wealth cookbook. And the reason why is my mom died 30 years ago, and a lot of her recipes and things that kind of went their separate ways. People took recipe boxes, and so some of these things I've never had again. Some of the things that she made for us, some of the recipes I've never seen in 30 years. I used to work as a graphic designer, and I decided I'm going to do a cookbook with mental health information in it, because it struck me that a lot of people don't understand unless they actually experience it themselves, or even if you know somebody who does have it. There are a whole lot of things that people don't know, and a whole lot of statistics, and even a whole lot of people that have led amazing lives despite the fact they have mental illness. Madame Curie suffered from depression. Veronica Lake suffered from schizophrenia. A lot of it of the book is about PTSD and depression, but some of it's about other mental illnesses and facts and figures and suicide rates in countries where they've actually shown decreases in mental health problems because of private care, instead of it institutions being gotten rid of, and people being taken care of in private hospitals where they get more one-on-one attention. And so there's a ton of information, but I'm trying not to make it a downer book. I'm trying to make it something positive, and that's why I call it the Mental Wealth Cookbook. I actually called it the Nutter Sisters Mental Wealth Cookbook, because I can poke fun at myself. Other people do. And I've illustrated and laid it all out myself. I'm only about half done. I had hoped to be done by this year, but it had the effect of being able to distract me at the worst of times when PTSD was at its worst. I also I go out and I spend time every day with a friend who is intellectually challenged. We used to live together for 5 years, and I go down and see her and make her supper every day, and that kind of gives me a feeling that maybe I'm doing something sort of worthwhile, that there's a reason to keep on living.
So you're taking your experience and making an alternate meaning out of it.
I'm trying to make something positive out of it, because the first 4 years, everything was completely negative. I couldn't figure out a reason why I still existed, why I survived this, because I certainly didn't want to. And I was fighting for assisted dying.
For people who aren't
Putting
familiar with that term, it's the acronym is MAID, Medically Assistance in
medically
Death.
assisted, yeah, yeah. It's something I believed in, the right to die, since I was about 15. Believed in it even more when my parents both got sick.
How come?
It should have been, my mom desperately wanted to live. She got sick in the early 1980s. She was younger than I am now. She desperately wanted to live, and she would have done anything to live. And she had 4 operations and multiple bouts of chemo, etc. She should have had the option of ending her suffering if it got too bad. She suffered horribly, horribly, just physically and mentally. And if you wanted to stop that, you had to take your own life. She spent the last 2.5 months of her life starving to death. She was able to take little sips of coffee, but basically She was a living skeleton. She looked like a concentration camp victim by the time she died. And she should have had the option to be able to stop that suffering. So, yeah, it's something I believe in strongly, but I also strongly believe in people's right to live, even though they're sick, they're terminally ill, because so it's both sides of the assisted dying or not assisted dying. I'm about choice. I'm about people making their own decisions.
So it occurs to me that because your complaint with the College of Physicians was dismissed, that there's no assurance that the errors that you experienced aren't being repeated.
That's correct, and that's why I've refused to be shut down. Like I said, I from the beginning, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to point my finger at these doctors. I believe that they meant well, but I believe that what happened to me, but most people don't care until it happens to them or happens to somebody they love. But the thing is like what happened to me could happen to any person, anyone. Some traumas are so intense that you'd almost rather die than face the fear. Like there's nothing that I'm any more afraid of than surgery, than going into hospitals. I mean, I have a hard time even going by them on the bus. My throat is just strangling me.
So, how are you doing now, both physically and mentally, emotionally?
Definitely better than I was. Physically, I'm still healing. I don't know that I'm never going to be normal. But in the last few months, there's been some reduction in pain and improvement in the function of the bowel. And mentally, I'm quite a bit better. I mean, I still have PTSD, and it's going to last a long, long time.
And what are you doing? What sort of therapy are you getting for that right now?
None right now. There's a gentleman who saw me for a couple of years pro bono, because he was somebody that I knew. For me, a behavioralist approach is sort of work better, trying to reshape things and find the positives in things. By times, no, you can't do that when it first happens. You concentrate on trying to assure somebody that they're safe and that it's not going to happen again. For me, trying to go too positive at first, just you can't do it. I was just my whole brain was negatively wired. And I've read and heard, been told by doctors that anesthetic can actually mess your brain up dramatically. That's without having an adverse event like PTSD. So yes, I wasn't depressed at the time that this all happened to me, but within 3 months, I was very, very clinically depressed and treatment resistant. And my PTSD has always been treatment resistant. I know that for some people, therapy helps, but like I said, mainly you've got to make sure that person feels safe. And I haven't felt safe in years, but I'm doing a little better.
That's how you're doing physically and mentally now, still dealing with the PSD, although it's lessened some. Yeah, and you're writing the cookbook, which sounds very therapeutic and meaningful, and
Yes,
also increasing awareness. So it's not just meaningful for you, but it's meaningful for the public.
yes, yeah. And I did start just writing down what happened to me. Like I've tried blogging and everything else. I find it very, very painful, but I just want to write down what happened in like book form, even if I have to self-publish it. and even if nobody reads it, because I think that will be therapeutic for me as well. So yes, I'm doing better considerably because my attitude has changed. I'm trying to live with it and I'm trying to forgive it, but I don't want it to happen to anyone else. I know from my own experience that anger, even justifiable anger, is darker and more malignant than just about any cancer. And it can eat you alive from the inside out. And it doesn't do anything to the person you're angry at, it destroys you. I had said at first, they should all be videotaped, informed consent.
Yeah, it's a form of accountability.
It is, and it is protection for both the hospital and the patient. There are all kinds of assistive technology, but I think the biggest thing is just make sure you communicate. There was a doctor in Ontario who lost her license for 2 years, a gynecologist, for performing multiple surgeries and taking out body parts, second ovaries and hysterectomies and stuff like that without getting consent. She had like 27 patients with adverse outcomes. In one case, one lady went in for a hysterectomy and her bowel had ruptured, whether it was nicked during the surgery or whatever. But she required an ostomy and multiple surgeries for trying to repair the damage done to her. Now, I believe the surgeon who operated on me is a good surgeon. I've heard that he is. I don't think it matters how good you are if somebody doesn't have consent. If people don't know what's going on, if they, you can't make a decision based on something that you haven't been told. You're only as good as the information that passes back and forth from doctor to patient, no matter how good you are in surgery.
Well, those are some real words of experience and wisdom. It's really around the communication. Your
It's,
idea of video recording or even audio recording the
yeah, yeah.
consent information, that's a great, simple idea.
But they said that, that's sort of an invasion of privacy. And no, it's safety. It's safety for you and it's safety for the patient.